Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Liturgy of the Chalice. Thank you so much for coming today, or for listening to this talk at some point after. I'm always really excited to get here and talk about some good stuff that can actually hopefully make our lives and the lives of everybody else happier. Today we continue our discussion of the Gospel of Mark. This is part 10 of a series that you can find on Facebook and on YouTube. And today's verses all come from chapter 5 of the Gospel of Mark. So we get into more exorcism and healing stories. Chapter 5 is all about more healings of Jesus and an exorcism that Jesus did that's very famous. Needless to say, in case you haven't been here before and come to the earlier classes, Mark's gospel pays a lot of attention to the exorcisms of Jesus and the physical healings of Jesus. Why was this? For those that come every week, you should be able to answer this right off the bat. It should be something that you understand by this point in this series. The exorcisms that Jesus did and the healings that he did demonstrated that Jesus shared in the Malkuth of God. What is the Malkuth? The Malkuth, as translated throughout the Christian scripture, through most English translations, not all. Some do agree with how we translate it here in the Church of Philip. But most people translate Malkuth as kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven. It really says Malkuth of heaven, Malkuth of God. And Malkuth, it can be translated as a kingdom, but it can also be translated as kingship, rulership, sovereignty, these kind of words. And here, and many other non-biased biblical scholars will call it the reign of God. We specifically tend to call it the sovereignty of God or the rulership of God. The rulership of God within our hearts. God rules the hearts of his children in a loving and supportive way. So the Malkuth, whenever a saint is spiritually regenerated, whenever a saint has rebirth, which is a special initiation that Jesus gave to very advanced disciples, and it was not the same as baptism. Baptism was a preliminary initiation, saying where the disciple, the want to be disciple of Jesus, says that I want to follow the way of God. I want to make a return to God. That is what baptism symbolizes, a purification and a rededication of oneself to seeking God. Spiritual rebirth was the final initiation of Jesus. And that initiation made one a saint, made one perfect. And we all know that whenever we got our baptism, we weren't perfect. So baptism is a beginning step at saying that I want to follow the teachings of Jesus so that I can perfect and purify my soul so that I can become a spiritually regenerated Baranash. Baranash is the Aramaic for son of man. Son of man is a very specific kind of Messiah. There are many kinds of messianic expectations. And in Christianity, the writers of the gospel conflate the traditional idea of the Son of Man Messiah with the Davidic Messiah. Jesus preached the Son of Man Messiah, which was a collective body of saints or a communion of saints, an anointed humanity that was also called the second Adam. The first Adam came from Adam and Eve, and it's a humanity that is mostly apathetic to spiritual values. The second Adam are those who have purified themselves to the teachings of Jesus and have been reborn into the second humanity, the Baranash, the Son of Man, the communion of saints. Whenever you are reborn, pardon me, when you are reborn into the Son of Man, Messiah, the communion of saints, you share in God's Malkuth. You share in God's volition. You share a portion of his power and his responsibility to evolve the earth and humanity. What Jesus showed through his exorcisms and through his healings was that God's Malkuth was on earth and that it works through spiritually regenerated, perfected saints like Jesus. And Jesus did not claim that he was the only one that could do exorcisms or heal. But it was a demonstration to the public that God's power is here on earth. God's sovereignty is here. And it worked through me, through this channel called Jesus. And there are those of you that will do more than I do. Whether or not that's true. Jesus was probably being humble with that statement. But Jesus is saying that what I do, you can do more. What I do, you can do. And you can also do more if you aspire to such spiritual greatness. So the exorcisms of Jesus were real. The healings of Jesus were real. And they were meant to show that God's rulership was here present on earth. That God's power, his reign, was imminent. And that anybody that wanted to purify their hearts could inherit a portion of this power to do God's will on earth as it is in heaven. So let's look at the famous exorcism of the demons that call themselves Legion. Is this historical or not? That's what we're looking at. So Mark 5, 1 through 9, it reads, "They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles, chains. But the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, 'What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me.' For he had said to him, 'Come out of the man, you unclean spirit.' And then the negative spirit said to Jesus, 'My name is Legion, for we are many.'" What does all this mean? Are exorcisms real? I can tell you from my experience that exorcisms are real. They don't look like what you see in the movies. Although this seems very dramatic, what the writer or writers of Mark are saying. This man was possessed and he's running around naked through a cemetery, essentially. And he would howl and bruise himself with stones. They tried to restrain him, but he has like this superhuman strength that breaks the chains. And when this being confronted Jesus, Jesus said, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he asked the demon, or the unclean spirit, which is more accurate, to say, "What is your name?" For whatever reason, it seems that Jesus was able to obtain power over unclean spirits by asking them what their name was. And The demon or demons responded, "My name is Legion, for we are many," insinuating that there were many negative beings, many unclean spirits that were possessing or obsessing this poor man. So definitely exorcisms are real. I've been trained in exorcism. I've seen exorcisms done that are real. Again, I've never seen something so dramatic as is stated here or that we see in movies. But definitely, it does exist. Still in these times. The demon said at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" So it's apparent that these unclean spirits recognize Jesus as a purified saint of Israel. Son of God did not mean that God had intercourse with a woman and birthed a biological son, as Orthodox Christians purport. Son of God, or Son of the Most High God, is a title for Jewish Tzaddikim, perfected saints. So this demon purportedly calls Jesus by name and recognizes him as a son of God, as a Jewish perfected saint, one that has the rulership, the power of God coursing through him. Is this historical? I'm not sure. I don't know that an unclean spirit would know Jesus' name. But what an unclean spirit definitively does know in these situations, which they're going to be cast out, is that the person that is casting you out has a very high spiritual vibration. So no doubt, the unclean spirit will repel and horrified by the divine power coursing through the Master Jesus and vibrating through his voice and every cell of his body. The ultimate good that Jesus embodied and the ultimate negativity that was possessing or obsessing this man repulsed each other. And definitely Jesus would have been able to feel the negativity within the man, and the possessed man would feel the spiritual power of Jesus. And that's the historical fact, the probable historical situation. That the demon knew Jesus' name is doubtful, but I do believe that the idea of Jesus, Son of God Most High, was meant to say that the demons recognized a spiritually mature, a spiritualized, purified, sanctified soul was there. And these unclean spirits that possess people, they know they're doing something wrong. They know that they're stealing the life force of their host. And that's really what they're like, at least in my experience. A possession is like a psychic vampire. They feed off of your life force. They encourage you to eat and drink things that they would like to eat and drink. And they encourage their host to experience negative thoughts and negative emotions and do negative things that they normally wouldn't think, emote, or do. And that's how they keep them trapped, is by inspiring them to think, do, or say negative things. So Jesus, again, seemed to get power over these demons to cast them out by asking what their name was. And the possessed man, the demons within the possessed man, say, "My name is Legion, for we are many." This is both non-historical and historical mixed together. This last line, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Why is it historical? Let's start with that. It is historical because in the Gospel of Thomas, which is known to predate Mark by at least a generation, maybe 2 generations, Jesus talks about the fact that many unclean spirits can possess a person. So there's precedent for it within the Gospel of Thomas, which is an older recording of Jesus' sayings and teachings. And the sayings about exorcism in the Gospel of Thomas are replete with Aramaisms. In other words, if you know how to read the Coptic, you can see the Aramaic and the Coptic version of the Gospel of Thomas. So there are a few, I think 2 or 3, I think it's 3 verses in the Gospel of Thomas that directly relate to exorcism. In one of them, Jesus warns that if you don't do exorcism correctly on somebody, then not only one spirit will come back, but he'll bring all of his friends with him, essentially. So it is entirely possible, according to Jesus, in the Gospel of Thomas, for one person to be possessed or obsessed by several or many unclean spirits. What is probably unhistorical? My name is Legion. What is a legion? A legion is a group of Roman soldiers. A legion is a group of Roman soldiers. So the Romans were occupying Jerusalem and Judea, and the Jews, although they had to respect or have an outer show of respect for the Roman governance, this was a slight, a very obvious slight against the Romans, saying that the Romans are like unclean spirits or demons that need to be extricated from Judea, from Jerusalem. So, are exorcisms real? Yes, they do. Yes, priests, including the priests of my tradition and priestesses, we are trained in exorcism. I've seen it done. I've seen it work, both before and after I was ordained as a priest. And it seems that many unclean spirits can possess one human body at a time, based off of what this says and what the Gospel of Mark says. However, I believe that this whole story that we're seeing here about Legion is really about the Roman occupation of Jerusalem and Judea and all of Israel. It's an allegory that the Roman soldiers and the Roman governance are like demons, like unclean spirits that have possessed and taken over control of Israel. And there were many of them. And that's why the demon says, my name is Legion. So exorcisms were true, but most likely this exorcism is a teaching story about the Roman occupation. And it lets you know very clearly how the Jewish people felt about the Romans, that they needed to be exorcised from Israel. That Israeli people of that time wanted to have sovereign control of their own cities and nations. That is the meaning, both historical and non-historical meaning of Mark 5, 1 through 9. Next, we come to a series of healing. Oh, pardon me. The rest of the exorcism story, this is also probably historical. So the story continues after the demon said, my name is Legion. Mark 5, 10 through 13. He, the demon-possessed man, begged him, Jesus, earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now, there on the hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, send us into the swine, let us enter them. So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine. And the herd, numbering about 2,000 pigs, rushed down the steep bank and into the sea, and were drowned in the sea. So here, the unclean spirits that were inside the man realized that Jesus had the power to cast them out. And they didn't want to just be cast out into nothing. They asked Jesus to allow them to possess the pigs. Why? What are these unclean spirits? In Orthodox Christianity, they call them demons. But demons, they are not. What possesses or obsesses people can vary. But what is happening in this situation, in most situations of possession, is that the nefesh, which is a disincarnate personality of a recently dead person, is trying to inhabit a body so they can enjoy things that they cannot enjoy since they died. So there's the basar, which is the physical flesh of a being, and whenever a person dies, the nefesh, which is their personality, their gender, their emotions, their thoughts, it sticks around. It can't stick around earth realms. And extremely negative people, they want to possess human vehicles so they can continue to enjoy human food, human drinks, human pleasures, etc. But a nefesh experiences a second death after 40 days. So after your first clinical death, there's a second death that occurs. The death of the nefesh, which is within or by 40 days. And then the soul reincarnates. Unless it's a perfected saint, the chema, the resurrection. So these beings, they know that they are going to disintegrate and that they will no longer exist in the same type of personality that they've been. So they possess humans because they feed off of life force so that they don't experience the second death. Whenever a priest or priestess exorcises an unclean spirit, it forces their nefesh to dissolve, and then they're able to restart a process of spiritual evolution. So the demons within this possessed man wanted to go into pigs so they could feed off the pig's life force and not dissolve in the second death. So Jesus gave them permission to enter the pigs, and the pigs ran over the hill into the ocean. This may seem very cruel of Jesus. Why did Jesus let 2,000 pigs die? Why not just cast out the demons and have them dissolve? The pigs didn't die. Pigs, as you can see right here on the right, are very good swimmers. They do not drown. So Jesus allowed the demons, the unclean spirit, the nefesh, he allowed them to go into the pigs. The pigs ran over the hill into the sea, which is salt water. When you read Jewish, Haggadic, and Talmudic resources, it says that demons can be cast out by salt water or by being amongst evergreen trees, or better yet, to be amongst both. So what Jesus did was that he let the demons go into the pigs, knowing full well that the obsessed pigs would go crazy, run over the hill, fall into the salt water of the sea, and that actually cast out all the demons, making them dissolve. The pigs, they simply swam back to shore. So the only thing that poetically drowned the sea were the unclean spirits. No pigs were harmed in this story. So this is probably actually, even if this story didn't happen, it was all about, the eradication of the Romans from Judea, it still holds valid teaching about exorcism, as it was understood in Jesus' time and right before Jesus' time. And that is that exorcism is facilitated by salt water. So very interesting stuff here. Again, most likely it's a combination of historical ideas with a non-historical setting. Right after this happens, Jesus moves on, and almost immediately Jairus comes up to Jesus begging for help to heal his dying daughter. In Mark 5:21 through 24, it says, when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Chalice, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. So Jesus felt great compassion for Jairus, who was the leader of a synagogue, and he immediately went with Jairus to his house to heal his daughter, who was very sick. On the way, Jesus had to pass through many crowds that knew that he did these exorcisms, that knew that he did these physical healings. So he had a hard time moving to the major city areas because they knew who he was. He was essentially a spiritual celebrity. So on the way to Jairus' house, this other healing occurred, a very famous one. Mark 5:25 through 34. It says, now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say who touched me? Because there were so many people there. Jesus looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. So this is a very beautiful story. I believe that it's historically accurate, or could be historically accurate. So there's huge crowds of people. Jesus is going to a house to heal this man's daughter. And this woman has been suffering for 12 years. She can clearly see by the way people are crowding in on Jesus, trying to catch his attention, that there's probably little chance that she'd be able to ask him to heal her directly. But she had such incredible faith in Jesus as a great sage and healer. She thought, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. And immediately she was healed. And Jesus felt a power leave his body. We all have a certain amount of energy in our body. And in order to heal, you are sharing a kind of energy with a diseased person. So Jesus, being who he was, immediately felt something leave himself and go into somebody else. And he wanted to know who it was. And he wanted to just see the person and see what they were like. And his disciples said, how can you ask who touched me? There are thousands of people here. So many people touched you or brushed up against you. But this woman brushed up against him with faith, thinking, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healthy again. And she came to him being afraid because, from her perspective, she'd stolen the healing, right? But Jesus wasn't upset with her at all. He was very pleased with her faith and who he was and the power of the Malkuth that went through him. He said, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. So he blessed her. Faith means fidelity. It comes from emunah. So it doesn't mean, a lot of people want to twist this into being belief in Jesus. Your belief in Jesus as whatever is what healed you of your disease. But what it's really saying is, daughter, your fidelity to the way of God has healed you. Your fidelity to the way of the God which I expressed in my teachings, my life, my walk, my gait. Your faithfulness in what I am, who I am, what I represent, and the Malkuth, the power of God that flows through me. Your fidelity with that has made you well. And Jesus keeps on going. He goes directly to Jairus' house to heal the little girl. This story becomes a story about raising the dead. Isn't historical? Isn't historical? Mark 5, 35 through 36, 39 through 43. While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. Do not fear, only believe. So as this whole drama is unfolding with the woman being healed of her blood disease by touching Jesus' clothing, somebody runs up to Jesus and Jairus and says, your daughter has died. She's dead. So, you don't need to bother Jesus to come to your house. It's over. And Jesus said to Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. When Jesus had entered Jairus' house, he said to them, why do you make a commotion in me? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means little girl, get up. And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. So obviously they didn't really listen well to Jesus because everybody knows this story, right? So let's begin with why he didn't want people to know. Number one, early in the Gospel of Mark, all the powers that be in the second temple of Jerusalem were saying that he exercised by the power of Satan, by Beelzebub, right? So if he was noted as raising somebody from the dead, they would say, well, what evil power from the underworld allows you to raise the dead? They just twist the story. So Jesus said, just keep this between us. Be grateful your daughter is alive, but please keep it just among this circle of people. Because if not, the powers that be in the temple establishment will come after me. They'll accuse me of doing something or dark. And he didn't want trouble. Jesus knew that what he was teaching was going to get him killed. He knew that he'd probably be imprisoned and or executed, because his teachings were so radically different from the Jewish powers of the temple. And historically, prophets have always been in opposition with the temple establishment, whether it was the first temple or the second temple. So Jesus just didn't want any trouble. He knew trouble was coming, but why invite it? So just keep this healing between us. When Jairus and Jesus were told that the little girl had died, Jesus is quoted as having said, "Do not fear, only believe." Believe is the English translation of the Greek word pistis, which means to believe. However, there was no belief system. There was never a tradition in Judaism to believe something. God existed, and you're meant to be faithful with God, have fidelity with God, trust God. And many of these words would have been a better translation for believe. The probable Hebrew word that would roll back this piece would be, which means to have faith in God, have fidelity to God, to do the way of God, to trust God. All of these things are true of emunah. So essentially, the way this sentence is shaped in the Christian Testament means believe in me, Jesus, or that's how it's interpreted. But what Jesus would mean historically is to do not fear, trust in God. Do not fear, have faith in God. He was trying to make the man's spiritual optimism raise. Because receptivity in a healer allows the facilitation of healing to happen. So do not fear, trust God. Trust me, she's not dead. And he even went into the house. Why do you make commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And everybody laughed because they knew she'd died. They checked that there was no breath. They checked that there was no heartbeat. But Jesus said she's just sleeping. So Jesus took the girl by the hand and said, little girl, get up. And whenever he touched the girl's hand, kind of like the cardiac paddles that you see in all the movies, where they take the paddles and they pump the person's heart. That's what Jesus' hand did. Spiritual power went into her. And it enlivened her. So she hadn't been dead too long. And in many spiritual traditions, it's said that whenever a person dies, they have something called inner restoration, where their breath and their vital functions become a subtle energy that resides in the spine. And that collection of life force stays within the spine for about the period it takes to eat a meal, which is about 30 minutes. So Jesus was able to get to her during that time, and he gave her a boost of vital life force. And then he instructed the parents to feed her, give her more nutrients, give her more energy, ground her in the material world. And this is what happened. In the book of Ecclesiastes, if you're following the Shabbat talks that we do on Fridays, it speaks of a silver cord, and that when the silver cord breaks, you are dead. So based off of this Jewish understanding in these verses, even though the girl was essentially coding in today's medical language, she was coding, she wasn't fully dead yet. the silver cord had not been separated. So she was well on her way to dead, and probably dead by all clear means. But that vital life force, that inner respiration, still within her. And Jesus, through his touch and the vibration of his words, was able to stimulate the little spark of life that was left in this girl back into the fire of full, living, breathing human. And that is the interpretation of these verses that I'll give today. Let's continue with the liturgy of the chalice.